The bank manager said my name twice, slowly, like he was checking if I was the right person. My mother stood next to me, arms crossed, already irritated. He held up a thin, faded passbook in a plastic sleeve. "This was reported destroyed," he said, not accusing, just stating a fact. People in line behind us shifted. Someone coughed. My mother laughed and said it was junk. Old paper. Not worth keeping. The manager didn't smile. That's when I realized this wasn't about money. It was about what had been taken from me, quietly, years ago. I grew up believing my grandfather was the only adult who noticed me. He never raised his voice. He never corrected my posture or my tone. When my parents argued, he handed me oranges and told me stories about small towns that no longer existed. On my 18th birthday, he gave me a thin envelope and told me not to open it yet. He said some things were safer when they waited. After he died, my mother handled his things. She said she was simplifying. She said clutter caused stress. I believed her because believing was easier for everyone involved. Years later, when the bank manager looked at me, I remembered that envelope. I remembered asking my mother about it once. She told me Grandpa left nothing formal. No accounts. No surprises. She said if there was anything important, she would have mentioned it. Her voice had that tone adults used to end questions. I learned early that persistence was punished with silence. So I stopped asking. I learned to accept summaries instead of details, decisions instead of explanations, and smiles that closed conversations. It kept peace, but it erased parts of me over time without anyone noticing it all. The day at the bank felt accidental, like most important things. I was there to cash a small check for my mother. She hovered beside me, correcting my spelling on the form. The manager paused, went to the back, and returned holding the passbook. It was my grandfather's handwriting. My name, written carefully. The balance wasn't dramatic, but it was steady. Decades of patience. My mother said she had thrown it away during a move. The manager said the record never closed. He waited quietly, letting the silence do the work for him while other customers pretended not to listen. I didn't look at my mother. I watched her jaw tighten, her foot shift. She said the money was insignificant. She said Grandpa wouldn't want drama. She said families shouldn't fight over scraps. No one corrected her. The manager explained procedures. Paperwork. Identity verification. A waiting period. He asked me if I wanted to proceed. He didn't look at my mother when he asked. That small respect landed heavier than the balance. I nodded. My mother sighed like I had embarrassed her in public, again, the way I always seemed to do growing up without ever intending to cause harm. That was the first time I noticed how authority worked in our family. It wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel. It was administrative. My mother decided what existed and what didn't. What was remembered and what was discarded. She framed it as protection. Less complexity. Fewer questions. Everyone benefited from the quiet except me. Standing there, I understood this wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding. It was a pattern I had mistaken for care. The bank lobby felt colder after that thought settled, final and unmoving, like paperwork filed away where I could not reach it no matter how I tried. I left the bank without speaking. My mother talked the entire drive home. About errands. About dinner. About how people made mountains out of nothing. I listened the way I always had. Later that night, I sat alone and thought about my grandfather choosing patience over confrontation. He had trusted time and systems more than explanations. I finally understood his gift wasn't just the money. It was evidence. Proof that someone had seen me and planned for me quietly. I stopped feeling confused. I started feeling done with questions that would never be answered honestly inside our family structure again. After the bank, nothing changed on the surface. That was the part that unsettled me most. My mother didn't apologize. She didn't explain. She behaved the same way she always had, as if consistency could smooth over anything inconvenient. She asked what I wanted for dinner. She reminded me about bills. She told relatives I was busy when they called. Life kept moving, and I moved with it, but something had shifted underneath. I started noticing how often decisions had been made for me long before I was invited into the room. I replayed small moments I had dismissed for years. College paperwork I never saw. Mail opened before I got home. A job offer I was told wasn't realistic and later learned had included relocation money. Each time, there had been a reasonable explanation. Each time, I had accepted it because resisting felt selfish. It was easier to believe I was being protected than to accept that my preferences were simply inconvenient. The passbook didn't create the pattern. It confirmed it. It gave shape to something I had felt but never named. The bank sent letters addressed to me directly. I noticed my mother watching the mailbox more closely. She asked what they said. I told her they were informational. That wasn't a lie. I didn't volunteer details. I was learning that silence could belong to me, too. When the waiting period ended, the manager called and spoke only to me. He explained next steps in a neutral voice, the way professionals do when they assume competence. That assumption felt new. I realized how rarely it had been offered at home. At a family dinner, my aunt joked about Grandpa being sentimental. My mother laughed louder than necessary. I didn't join in. I noticed how the table conversation subtly adjusted around my quiet. Topics changed. Jokes ended early. No one asked me what I thought. That had always been the rule. But now, instead of shrinking, I observed. The comfort everyone else enjoyed relied on my compliance. My silence had been useful. It kept things smooth. It kept the story simple. It also kept me small. I thought about the word "threw away." My mother used it casually, like tossing expired coupons. She never said, "I decided." She said, "It didn't matter." That distinction mattered to me now. Declaring something unimportant was easier than admitting choice. I stopped framing her actions as errors. I started seeing them as selections made with confidence. The system worked because it was quiet. Because no one challenged it. Because I had never challenged it. When the bank transfer completed, I didn't tell anyone. The amount wasn't life-changing, but the process was. Forms. Verification. Signatures. Time. The money moved because it was documented, not because anyone felt generous. I understood then why my grandfather trusted institutions over conversations. Feelings could be rewritten. Records could not. I felt a calm settle in, not relief exactly, but clarity. I didn't need to confront my mother to understand my place. I had always been the flexible part of the structure. And flexible things get bent, not consulted. The boundary was crossed on an ordinary afternoon. No argument. No raised voices. Just paperwork again. I came home to find a folder on the kitchen table with my name written in my mother's handwriting. Inside were documents she had printed from my email. Bank notices. Account summaries. She said she needed them for her records. She said it casually, like borrowing sugar. She didn't ask. She never had. I stood there longer than necessary, reading the same lines twice. She watched me, waiting for my usual response. A nod. Compliance. Gratitude for her involvement. Instead, I gathered the papers, slid them back into the folder, and took them with me. I didn't explain. I didn't accuse. I went to my room and locked the door. That was it. That was the moment. Small. Quiet. Unmistakable. That night, I changed passwords. Email. Banking. Storage. I rented a small mailbox across town. I set up alerts that went only to my phone. These were not dramatic acts. They were administrative corrections. I noticed how steady my hands were. How calm the decisions felt. I wasn't angry. I was precise. I wasn't withdrawing love. I was withdrawing access. My mother noticed within days. She asked why mail stopped coming. She said it was inefficient. She said families didn't need barriers. I told her I had things handled. The sentence surprised both of us. She pressed once more, lightly, the way someone tests a door they expect to open. I didn't move. The conversation ended without resolution, which was new. I let the discomfort sit where it landed. I stopped sharing plans. I stopped asking for input. When relatives asked questions, I gave short answers. When my mother corrected my choices in front of others, I let the silence stretch. No defense. No counter-story. People filled the gap with their own assumptions. I learned how quickly narratives weaken without reinforcement. The house felt different. Quieter. Less coordinated. I realized how much invisible labor I had been doing just by explaining myself. I didn't announce boundaries. I enforced them by absence. I didn't need my mother to agree for them to exist. The systems I relied on now required consent and authentication. They didn't recognize maternal authority. That difference mattered. For the first time, my life moved without being previewed, filtered, or improved by someone else. I wasn't punishing anyone. I was stepping out of a role that had never been assigned to me openly, only assumed. I didn't leave the house. I didn't make an announcement. I stayed and became harder to reach. That was enough. Systems began to notice what people didn't. Bills redirected. Accounts updated. Mail stopped appearing on the kitchen counter. My mother complained about things slipping through the cracks. She said nothing worked like it used to. I listened without offering solutions. Silence, I had learned, was not empty. It redirected responsibility back to its source. Months later, the bank sent a final statement. I filed it away with the others. The money stayed untouched. It wasn't meant to rescue me. It was meant to anchor me. My grandfather had understood something I hadn't until now. That control doesn't require confrontation. It requires structure. Time. Distance. Letting systems do what emotions never could. My mother eventually asked why I seemed distant. She said she missed when we were close. I thought about that word. Close had always meant accessible. Available. Open for review. I told her I was busy. That was true. I was busy building a life that didn't require translation. She nodded, unsatisfied, and moved on. The conversation ended the way most of ours now did. Without resolution. Without ownership. The consequences didn't arrive with drama. They arrived with inconvenience. Missed information. Lost access. Confusion she couldn't smooth over with tone. She began explaining herself to people who didn't need convincing. The story frayed without my participation. I watched from a distance I hadn't planned, but didn't resist. I think about my grandfather often. About patience. About waiting for the right container. The passbook should have stayed buried, my mother said. Maybe she was right. But some things surface when the ground shifts. I didn't need revenge. I needed autonomy. I have it now, quietly. I move forward without asking permission, without clarifying my choices. The systems recognize me. That's enough.